All right, thank you so much, Marina. Just a quick question. I also see some familiar faces, but just show of hands, how many of you been to Growth Colony events before? Yeah, a couple of hands. That's good. Well, for those of you who are new, I'll quickly explain what Growth Colony is and what we do. So Growth Colony is a growth marketing community where we started probably about 8 months ago, and we're having regular events around everything that is growth related. So from some of this traditional marketing where we talk about brand awareness, all the way to looking at further down the funnel and some of the new emerging areas in growth, whether it's automation, whether it's new platforms that you advertise, and so on and so forth. So we try to bring speakers that are kind of in the trenches and are practicing some of the new tactics that are out there. A great example is tonight Boden, who is the marketing director of Catapult. Now, Boden is going to tell you a lot more about Catapult and what Catapult is, but Catapult is this, I guess you could call it a startup, but it has grown exponentially in the past few years, based right here in Melbourne, and specifically looking at sport technology, and have expanded really quickly in the global market, and have landed some very interesting investors and customer as they've gone through that journey. So Boden is gonna talk about that journey and how that journey looked like, because he was pretty much there right from the beginning when the company started to grow very rapidly, and the team at the company decided that they want to look at expansion. So that's very exciting to be part of that journey and seeing the company growing to a point that it's in 10 cities and have team in 25 countries or 25 cities and at 350 or so people today. So he's going to take us through that journey of what has happened with Catapult as they grew. How did they introduce new products, and also what are the kind of what marketing worked for them, and how do they approach marketing today? So that is kind of what we're talking about tonight. Now, I want to also thank Academy XI for hosting us. As Marina and Frank, we're very grateful. The other sponsor of Growth Colony is X-Growth, which is a growth marketing agency based in Melbourne, focusing mainly on B2B businesses and helping them grow and increase their revenue specifically from their marketing activities. And on that note, I will pass it on to Boden, and please help me welcome Boden to give us a talk, please.
Hi guys, thanks to Growth Colony and Academy XI for having me tonight, and for everyone showing up. It's a nice little venue. I came probably 6 weeks ago, I think, to the content marketing presentation, which I got a lot out of. I just said I wrote down probably 2 or 3 pages of notes, which I was told that was good ROI. So hopefully if anyone writes down notes tonight, I'll take that as an accomplishment. So firstly, has anyone in the room heard of Catapult? Familiar what we, okay, way more people than I thought actually. I might have to change a few of my slides. So Catapult, we're based in Melbourne. Our office is in Prahran on High Street, right near the station. I put it's quite small, but my email address is on there. Feel free to write it down if you have any questions. I also like to put on the first slide to show that I got in quite early at Catapult. You'll see I've just got my first name in my email address, which at a tech company is usually a sign that you're there sort of from the start. So we've got about 330 staff globally now, but I was in at about number 11 or 12 when we were in South Melbourne, just above a coffee shop on Farrar Street. Then we moved to Docklands. Now we're in Prahran and have expanded quite rapidly. So I'm Director of Marketing, oversee all of our marketing on the B2B side, which I'll go into a little bit more detail, but we also have a B2C side of the business, which is run out of London. I don't have an org chart here, but I'm going to be super candid about everything. Feel free to ask me anything. I'm going to be as open as possible. We are publicly listed, so there'll be a few things that I can't say, but I'm going to be super open with everything else. So 3 things that I was told I should cover based on the website. So some strategic investment. So basically, Mark Cuban is an investor in the company, a small investor, but obviously the biggest name that we have on our investor list. So sort of the story on how that came to be, and general US growth. Back to me again, but I lived in Chicago for 3.5 years. Catapult moved me over there when we were very, very small. I'll get into that a little bit more detail, but so I was pretty closely involved in our US growth. Product positioning, as was mentioned, we've always been seen as sort of this wearable technology company. If you have heard of Catapult, you probably think of us as the GPS device on the back of AFL players. We're now a sort of a full stack technology solution for elite sport, which of course I'll get into. So how we sort of position ourselves away from just being that wearable product to diversification, I guess, in the sports technology space. And then some of the marketing tactics on the B2B side, how we sort of activate our brand through PR and workshops. So a little bit of background on Catapult. So more people than I thought had heard of the company in this room, so I won't go into too much detail. But most people, when they hear Catapult, they think sports bras on men. So especially this time of year in the Herald Sun, you open it up, AFL teams are back in pre-season, it's hot outside. They have to wear Catapult because the coach says they have to, but they don't have to wear their training jersey. So we get a lot of publicity like this. In Europe, UK, parts of Africa, mostly it's kind of a soccer culture thing, but they'll put their uniform on first, obviously, in the training room, and then when they go out on the field, they have to put our bra or sports bra, compression top, whatever, over the top. One, to show that they're wearing the technology and they're being tracked, but two, it's just the last thing they do when they come out of the locker room. So we get a lot of photos like this all around the world, which is great in marketing because I don't have to do any work. But most people, when they think of Catapult, they think sports bras.
I got a question.
Yeah, of course.
Well, you said it's a sports bra, but then if it's males, then can't this be converted to a tank top?
Yeah, so it's usually seen as a bra, but we do have a full length one and full sleeve and everything. So the bra itself doesn't do anything. Yeah, so we do have a new version that has integrated heart rate that's like fully kitted out with sensors.
Humorous.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's true. So we have a full length one just because in the US they won't wear that. But at the same time, it's a great marketing tool because everyone's like, what's that? Why is he wearing a sports bra? Especially in soccer. Sorry?
Is it to catch the attention?
A little bit, yeah. So that was a decision pretty early on. So obviously, the device itself is worn at the top of the spine. I'm getting into a bit of technical detail. It's worn there because you get the best GPS signal. All of our algorithms are based on that position. And also, if an athlete falls over, that's sort of the safest position. We've never had an injury based on our device there. So the reason it started out so small is because it's the least body contact. So when you play in the summer, it doesn't make the players as hot. We've had to make cosmetic changes in America because they won't wear that. But it was a decision early on to keep that sort of design because it's a talking point. You'll see in like the World Cup, player will score a goal, they'll rip off their jersey, you see Catapult. So things like that are part of the reason we kept it. So how Catapult came about, so early days, 1976, the Montreal Olympics, I believe. Australia didn't win a gold medal. So based off that, they pumped a whole bunch of government funding into starting the Australian Institute of Sport in Canberra. That was in 1981, I believe. So the next sort of 18 years, the AIS led sport globally in terms of quantifying what athletes did during performance. So the problem with that is they did it all in laboratories on treadmills with oxygen tanks, stuff they still do today. But it's not really indicative of what athletes do during competition because they're not out in the field, they're not competing against athletes. So the Australian Institute of Sport approached a Melbourne-based scientific research organisation called the CRC. Do I have a laser thing on this? Is it the red one?
I don't know, you can give it a try.
Okay.
Do you?
We'll find out. So they approached the cooperative research centres where Catapult's eventual co-founders were working, which was quite a unique collaboration at the time. It was the jocks and the nerds working together, figuring out ways they could quantify athlete performance, but actually on the field during competition. At the time, and still really today, the only way to do that is through wearable technology. So they created these sort of micro-technology sensors using the same technology from cochlear ear implants. So our co-founders were on that project as well. Started developing this technology to put on athletes. The first device itself was probably about that big, and it was actually on a boat. so a rowing boat. So it measured the tilt, yaw, and roll using accelerometers and gyroscopes and GPS. And then as the technology got smaller and smaller, it started being worn on the athletes to measure movement itself. So I've sort of jumped to the next stage. So that project between the CRC and AIS was in 1999. Catapult commercialized in 2006. Our two co-founders have all the patents on the technology, so there's about 12 patents involved in the original technology. So from 99 to 2006, it was used exclusively by the Australian Olympic team, which also worked out well for us because that was Australia's two best Olympics, with Sydney and Athens. So since 2006, when we commercialized, we now work with 1,800 professional elite teams. So when we do sort of our total addressable market, we say there's 10,000 professional teams in the world. I'll get to a little bit more detail in other products, but we also work in sort of the next layer down, which is about 20,000 teams. So that 1,800 means basically we have 18% market penetration. We have about 80% market share, so I'll get into competitors a little bit. But we work with pretty much every major professional team around the world in every sport, so NBA, NFL, Premier League, every team in Australia, pretty much any team you can think of that's sort of at that high level we work with. So that's basically what happened. Obviously technology got smaller, more advanced across the way. I joined in 2012, pretty early on. We, at the time, were all based in South Melbourne. Soon after I joined, we sent someone off to the US, someone to the UK, and just said, try and figure out how to sell it overseas. It was quite slow at first. We were basically just giving away devices. And then we sort of reached an inflection point, largely helpful to Mark Cuban in a lot of ways in the US, which I'll dig into. But sort of from 2014 to this year, it's grown exponentially. And we went public in December 2014 as well. So we made 4 acquisitions in the last 4 years. GP Sports was our biggest competitor at the time, based in Canberra. So very similar technology, much smaller team, a team of about a dozen people. So we bought them out in 2014. Exos Digital are the biggest video technology company in sport in North America. So they work with every NFL, NHL, college football, college ice hockey team. We acquired them in 2016. They're a team of 100 people in Boston and Orlando. So they're still relatively separate brands. So Exos Digital still exists in North America, but back office, it's all Catapult now. Playertech is a Dundalk, Ireland company. Again, more of an entry-level version of Catapult's wearable. We bought that to start to penetrate that amateur level. So not the 10,000 teams, but the 20, 30,000 teams underneath that. And then AMS by Catapult was an acquisition last year, a Brisbane-based company called SportsMed Elite, which is an athlete management system. So for capturing subjective data. So if you think of our wearable technology capturing objective data, so movement, heart rate, speed, distance, all that stuff, the AMS captures how much did you sleep last night, did you break up with your girlfriend, how much did you weigh before training, all that stuff. And then we merge it all together to get sort of the full picture. Stop me if you have any questions along the way too, otherwise I'm just going to keep talking. So we've got 330 staff, as I said, around the world. Our Melbourne office has 80 in Paran. Boston is 90. Chicago is about 20. London's about 20. Leeds is 30. So sort of 10 hubs, and then we've got people scattered around 24 cities around the world. A lot of remote people that are either sales or account management. And a really big sports science and engineer team. Our sports scientists traditionally are, or still are, our account managers. So we have a very high touch model with our elite technology. It's pretty expensive and it's not easy to use. So we usually provide a person to not just upskill and train and onboard and stuff, but sort of hold their hand along the way. Our audience personas vary depending on the region, but I spend a lot of time in the US, and our core audience persona there is like a 300-pound strength and conditioning coach that's never used a laptop, basically. So a big meathead that works in American football that doesn't understand data at all. So we have to basically supply them a sports scientist to hold their hand and maximize the data. Question?
Do you have a lab in each one of the cities, or is it pretty much just centralised, which is operates via a cloud system?
A lab, did you say?
Yeah.
As in to test the technology?
Yeah, testing, yeah.
That just Melbourne, really. So the Boston office, which is where the video company is, they have a separate lab. But yeah, in terms of sports science testing, it's all here. Yeah.
So quick question.
Yeah.
In terms of you're pitching at the elite level just now.
Yep.
It was a double-barrel question. How far away are you from amateur level?
Yep.
And then the second piece to that is that priced into the share price right now.
I'll answer the second one in detail.
Yep.
What do you mean in terms of share price?
Well, in terms of there's going to the next level below.
Yep.
Is an enormous opportunity.
Yeah.
But one no doubt you're already chasing.
Mhm.
Is that something investors already see? Am I going to get a bargain if I disclose to investors?
I'll say yes to the bargain. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a story we kind of tell in a quiet way to investors around that next market down. We've found that the biggest thing is that elite market, and investors care mostly about how we can maximise that, because everyone thinks it's sexy when you sign Real Madrid or the Brazil national team. That's the sort of exciting story we tell. But the reason we acquired that Irish company, Playertech, is to attack that market. And I think there needs to be a bit of education to investors around how big that market really is. And we've kind of just let it tick along the last 18 months, but it's growing very quickly and it's going to become more of our story as we go. Yeah, I think I covered the sports science team enough. So I've said enough how many clients we work with. Example of some of the biggest ones, 35 sports. Probably didn't realize there are 35 sports. Every time I speak at something, I always get a question, do you work in this sport? We pretty much work in every sport. And not just that, the technology's been validated independently by universities and research partners in pretty much every sport. One thing you'll find with research sports scientists, they all want to do validation papers on obscure, weird things that no one else is looking at. So Catapult's always being looked at in bandy and weird sports. Can't think of I had another example in my head, it'll come back to me. Yeah, so validated in a lot of sports. The most obvious ones, any field-based invasion sport, that's an internal term we use, but like soccer, rugby, union and league, American football, and obviously basketball, ice hockey, any big global sport. 128 countries Catapult is being used in. That's pretty heavily influenced by a somewhat recent deal we did with the CAF, which is Africa's soccer governing body. So that includes all 54 African countries. All their national teams are using Catapult, so that number's a little bit inflated. So I mentioned the validation. So we work with over 100 universities around the world, which is sort of a twofold thing. So their sports teams use Catapult on the field, but then their sports science, physiology, research departments use the technology to validate it and push it through research protocols, which all takes a long time, but we get independent research papers out of it that show technology measures what we say it measures.
When you say validated, validating the technology, is that the data monitoring technology or the improvements you get from applying the technology in devising new
good question.
tactics and strategies?
It's almost always the validity and reliability of the data from the technology, so not the application of it itself. Yeah. So they'll usually set up a little testing course in the MCG, and the hypothesis will be that maybe the roof of the MCG will affect the data, and they'll just set up a course and determine whether that's true or not. So that's it.
Do you have a superior technology that is a benchmark to validate this?
Do we have a superior technology, like compared to other products?
If there's nothing else out there, how can you validate the precision of this technology?
Yeah, no, good questions. They usually compare it, they'll compare it with video or radar guns. So other technologies are used to actually measure whether it's measuring what we say it does. But we do have competitors out there, so there's still validation against other products out there.
If you're vying for a contract in, say, a large organisation,
yep.
one of your competitors actually succeeds in getting a contract, does that mean the game's done, or is they sort of concurrently test yours and you have an opportunity to come back and talk to them again? How does that work?
Yeah, good question. I'll answer that in a couple of ways. So usually the bigger the opportunity, the longer the process to test different companies out there. So right now, this might be market sensitive information, so forget it after I say it, but we're going through this process with the NBA at the moment. So they're looking for one technology supplier, and they've engaged with a university in the US to do all the testing for them independently. So we've obviously just opened the doors. They can look at our technology in every way, but they're doing some pretty vicious protocols that every company that is trying to vie for this deal has to go through. We went through a similar thing with Real Madrid. We had like 5 companies they were looking at. They spent probably 6 months testing all the technologies. So the bigger the deal, the longer that process. And if we do lose a deal, there's 2 ways you can tell the story. Obviously, we tell investors that our data is really sticky, so when we win a deal, we've got that team for a long, long time. But we also want to tell the story, if we lose a deal, we have an opportunity to get back, because it's usually on subscription, so there's usually a chance to get back in down the track, which happens more than you think, because people that work in sport get fired a lot. They'll go to other teams, and they'll usually take our technology with them. So that happens quite a bit.
And your IP, how long has it got to go? And he's been around for a long time?
As in the patent? Yeah, they were all filed between 1999 2004, 20-year patents, so yeah, close to running out. So this next page, I've removed some of the more sensitive details, but this is we call it our SOAP, so our strategy on a page. So this is company-wide. I think you can take a photo of it if you want, but it's more of an internal thing. But it just covers sort of our purpose, so why we all show up to work every day, why the company exists. Our values, which are more internal, but we're starting to work into our external communication a little bit. So the 4 are ambition, intelligence, candor, and accountability. So those are deeply ingrained in everything we do. We have 2 strategic pillars. The grey bits are what I've had to remove, but the 2 strategic pillars are own the performance technology stack for elite sport, which I'll get into more detail, and then leverage that into consumer, which I'll also go into more detail. So we've got our key points of difference, which we call our moats. So anything we think we do better than competitors. 5 company goals. I don't know if it's worth reading these or not, but so we want to grow and strengthen our position in all attractive markets. We want to be the best team we can be in everything we do. Deliver a great service and experience, pretty obvious. Establish Catapult as the premier sports performance platform, which is the first pillar, and keep the business on a sustainable and scalable path to success. So we have a relatively new CEO. He's been in about 18 months. Previous CEO was the co-founder and the inventor of the technology. So we've brought in a professional CEO that's sort of codified a lot of the stuff that already existed, but just putting it on a page and making it a lot clearer, which has been fantastic for investors, just to tell that story in a clearer way. I've had to remove the KPIs, but we split everything into financial and operational, and then the key initiatives to get us to that stage.
Just on that,
yep.
It was the global sports performance platform. That's sort of pretty generic, perhaps wider than what you're currently doing. Are you looking at branching out into other technologies or areas to deliver that quite broad aim there of just enhancing performance?
Yeah, it is quite broad. So I've got a slide on, so we split that into 3. It's product-led, the way we've split it up, but we know about peripheral components to that platform that obviously any business, you either want to build it yourself, you want to buy it, or you want to partner with a company. So there's other parts of the platform that we're not currently playing in, but the 3 main ones we've identified, I'll dig into a little bit with our products. So getting into our products, you asked the question at a good time. So we think of the elite performance technology stack as basically the integration of all our products. So our wearable technology is our core business, what everyone knows Catapult as. Our video solution started with the acquisition of Exos, based in Boston. The problem with that product is it's very, very North American centric. All the servers are quite intensive, and it's expensive to set up and everything, and not scalable. Only works in a few sports. So what we're doing with that is we're taking all the knowledge that they've learned from the last 25 years, they've been around longer than Catapult, and turning that into a more scalable, Mac-based, cloud-based product, which is called Catapult Vision. So we just released that pretty recently. It's a more introductory video product than what is out in the market. But the advantage we have with that is it integrates perfectly with our wearable technology. So you can get all the performance data you get from our wearable products with all the video benefits and video tagging, merge them together, you get the full picture of what the athlete's doing during competition, coupled with the athlete management, which is, I mentioned earlier, all the subjective data. So you've got all the training, game, video, merged with our performance data, and then all the subjective stuff around sleep, weight, and everything. So you've got the full picture, of what the athlete is doing basically every day leading up to competition, and then you can start periodizing that stuff and planning years ahead. So those are the three buckets that we want to own. There are obviously other things that are peripheral, like technology in gyms. There's wearables around sleep itself. There's a lot of specific products that we're looking at, but these are the three that we're going after really hard. How that fits in the more broader strategy, so that platform is through the middle. That's all team-based technology. So the next step up from that is to not just sell team by team, but league by league. So the advantage of that is obviously instead of spending all this time selling to individual teams, you go in and sell to 20 teams at once. One, it kicks out any competitor that might be in that league. Two, you have one point of contact at the league instead of 20 points of contact. Usually they get a better deal, so we make a little bit less money, but you're basically consolidating across the entire league. The additional advantage of selling to a league is media opportunities. So we've done this better in Australia than any other country, but we work with the NBL, AFL, NRL, and Cricket Australia. I'm forgetting one. So we work with every team in the league on with an actual league-wide deal, and then we show our data during live broadcast through monetization. So if anyone watches the NRL State of Origin, you might have seen the Telstra tracker, which is just speed, distance, heart rate. So that's obviously our technology fueling that. We don't get our brand on the TV, but Telstra pays a lot of money to us, Channel 9, and the NRL. So it's kind of win-win for us because the players are already wearing the technology. We don't have to do any more work, and Telstra gives us extra money.
To any particular team?
Say that again, sorry?
What is the advantage to any particular team if the next team has got the exact same data capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, we provide a lot of data to these teams, and if you're a good sports scientist, you don't really care about speed, distance, and heart rate, so they're putting up pretty marginal data.
In the way that they want to.
Yeah.
Sports scientists use the data.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, sports scientists are getting really deep into the data, and Channel 9 just wants to put up data that people understand.
In that area, which I suspect would be the more value-adding area?
No, we want to get into that space, yeah. It's kind of less interesting because our data is pretty heavy and it's time intensive to explain sort of the value proposition and the education around it, whereas sports scientists just inherently get it. And I'll dig into this a little bit as well, but explaining the data through broadcast is a little bit trickier because you've got to think explaining it to your mum as opposed to someone that has done a university degree in it. But we're definitely getting more and more into that space.
Coach, the more sort of the more obvious user of that information?
Not the coach. The coach is one of our users, but it's always the performance coach, which is either the strength coach, conditioning, fitness coach, sports scientist, that sort of person. Yeah. In Australia, more than any other country, the coach does engage with the data, usually because it's been around longer here and they played recently, so they had to wear it, so they just understand it more, which we see in the AFL a lot, whereas in sort of the US and some of the big Premier League teams, the coach is like, nah, I don't care, don't show me that stuff. But it's always the fitness coach that cares the most. So that middle layer, that's that 10,000 teams we're going after that I mentioned, all team-based. The next layer down is why we acquired Player Tech to go after that 20, 30,000 teams, which is what you're asking about, so that amateur sort of sub-elite level. And the next level down from that is our consumer market, which is we're brand new into, which I'll dig into a little bit later. But what ties it all together is the more you see Catapult in media, the more consumer devices we sell. The more consumer devices out there, the more engagement with media. Yeah.
Is there an open API?
There is with our AMS product, the athlete management side, but not for video or wearables. So we see the AMS. So when I say performance stack, there's a few different ways you can look at it. You can think of 3 separate products that are integrated through single sign-on or whatever, or the AMS piece sits across it, and that's where you sort of dip into all the other data. So we have an open API for that, so you can use our AMS product, but then use a competitor video or wearable product. But basically, they have to pull our competitors' data into our platform, which obviously we have benefits from, but we don't let other companies pull our data into theirs. That makes sense. Keep going. Can't remember why I put that in there, but that's just one of our devices getting slotted into. I think that might have been supposed to be at the start. So everything we do is very sport specific as well. So we have a team of data scientists around the world that spend all day trying to find patterns in data. So they'll compare the raw traces of the accelerometer, gyroscope, and magnetometer data next to video. So when they see a slap shot in ice hockey or a goalkeeper diving right or a jump shot in basketball, they're looking at that in really, really granular detail and finding patterns, and then using machine learning algorithms to basically say that was a slap shot. So we're not just looking at performance-based things like speed and distance and heart rate and the obvious stuff, but we're actually diving into, that was a pun actually, diving into goalkeeper analytics and more specific position and sport-specific analytics. So fan engagement, I just kind of dug into this before I got to it. So we've done it with the NBL the last 2 years, and the good thing with the NBL compared to a league like the NBA, they just kind of let you do it. So I actually played in the NBL. We've got good relationships there. We didn't work with any teams on an individual basis when we signed that deal. There's only 8 teams in the NBL. They don't have a lot of money compared to a lot of teams globally in the basketball space. So we just went in there, sold to the entire league, and they didn't really care about it from a performance perspective. They cared about putting data on Fox Sports. So we started with that, and now we've sort of started to educate the teams on the performance benefits, which is quite a unique use case. Cricket Australia, the last 3 years, with the Ashes test, we've been showing heart rate and speed and distance, and every year people are amazed at how much distance bowlers cover. Like they'll cover like 16 kilometres, which is just incredible, I think, especially in the heat. AFL is our longest client. We work with all 18 teams for the last, I want to say 8 years. So our very, very first client was Hawthorn in 2007. Funnily enough, the Canberra company that we bought, GP Sports, even though we invented the technology, we worked with the Australian Olympic team for so long that they actually beat us to market. They snatched up all the AFL teams, but we got them back because we bought them and then took all the teams back. But so we got the AFL deal 4 years ago, I want to say. So we were working with them all individually. Now we work with them collectively and individually. And then I mentioned the NRL with State of Origin. So our consumer device. So this is just wearable, and it's very new. So we launched it in June in London. The Australian launch was September. So a very similar concept to our Elite wearable device. So you wear a device back here, you wear a sports bra, but instead of a coach looking at all your data on a laptop on the sidelines, after you play five-a-side soccer with your mates, you just look at it on your phone. You can see everything you did. It compares all your data with Premier League players in the same position, shows you a heat map, shows you your heart rate, speed, distance, all the same sort of basic metrics, and it's just all on your phone afterwards. We've got a new feature called Player Squad. So you can link it with your buddies and basically form a team, and you can look at your team data on your phone. Not only can you compare Premier League players, but you can, if you have a friend that lives in the US, you can compare your five-a-side data with their five-a-side data. So it sort of gamifies playing soccer. It's purely a soccer device. It's only used in one sport at the moment, but it's our first foray into the consumer market. So we've treated it like a startup, which has been interesting to be involved in. So the whole team that works on Player is in London. And I don't know if this is getting into too much detail, but the CEO of our consumer division, when we hired him, he took over global marketing as well. So we went through a rebrand last August, if anyone has followed us that closely. But he led that rebrand as part of the launch for Player. So it's sort of this long ramp towards that. He no longer oversees marketing, but it's still heavily integrated.
What does one of them sort of cost?
$300. Yeah, so you can get it on the website, you can get it on Amazon. There's about 10 Apple stores around the world that sell it, not in Melbourne, but yeah, you can just get it straight from the site.
You can just use it without playing soccer, right? You're playing on the sport on this track. The same sort of
yeah, you could, yeah. It's still going to compare your data to Premier League players, so it might be weird if you're playing rugby, but I mean, yeah.
See what your performance is.
Yeah, I mean, you could just run Albert Park Lake wearing it and it'll give you interesting data, but it's just designed for soccer, I guess. And the one way we've started to leverage sort of our elite client base into this product is it doesn't just tell you what you did, it's a little bit more prescriptive because you don't have a sports scientist there holding your hand. So at the end of a session, it'll say, oh, you reached your top distance, you should hydrate this much, and these are some training drills to maybe hit a higher top speed next time. So we've worked with a lot of our soccer clients, especially in the UK, to sort of capture content and then prescribe it to an amateur soccer player. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So we're trying to make it more of a sports scientist in your pocket as opposed to you cover this much distance, because at the end of the day you can do that with an Apple Watch. You're just not allowed to wear an Apple Watch when you play most soccer games. So we've identified there's 20 million soccer prosumers around the world, which is obviously a crazy number. There's 3 million within that 20 million that are sort of our target market, that people have money. So we've identified sort of 3, I've mentioned audience personas a lot, but our main audience persona for player is much younger than we originally thought, and it's only been out there for 4 or 5 months. So it's sort of that 12 to 16 age range, heavily dominant in the UK, so kids that think they're going to be in the Premier League, basically. But it's only been out there for a few months, but it's growing very, very rapidly. That's what the pod looks like. Very similar concept to our Elite device, and everything's on the phone. How am I going for time? Good. So that's all sort of Catapult stuff. The rest of it's sort of marketing. I've just taken a bunch of slides from our marketing plan. I'll be as open as possible. Fire away with questions. How many people are in the room work in marketing? Few? Yep, okay. The rest entrepreneurs or just business fans? Okay. Tell me if any of this is boring then. So this is sort of our elite brand plan that I do each year. It's fairly high level, but allows me to get into a little bit of detail and sort of correct the ship if we're going off plan. So it's broken into analysis, issue, strategies, and execution. So the analysis is where could we be, where are we, why are we here, how can we get there, what do we need to do. So it just allows you once a year to take a step back. Where are we today? Where do we want to go? Are we on track? At a very, very high level. And I present this to the exec team and they say, no, you're wrong, or yes, let's fix that. The main issues, so what is your current competitive position? What is the core strength your brand can win on? How tightly connected is your consumer to your brand? And what is the current business situation your brand faces? On the strategy side, the company goals I took straight from our SOAP. And then we have separate brand strategies. So these 5 here are the same here. So I can dig into those if you want. So the 5 things we're trying to change from a brand marketing perspective. It ties back to one of the questions. So traditionally we've only talked to the performance coach, because that's usually the only one that cares about our wearable technology. But now that we have video solutions, we have athlete management, and we have a consumer product, we need to start talking to the coach, and we need to start talking to the player. The a little bit confusing part between our elite product and our consumer product is people always ask, well, why don't you just pay professional athletes to promote your consumer product? The problem is the elite athletes are wearing our elite products, but consumer athletes are wearing a different product. So we haven't gone down that path. It's very expensive. If it's an athlete worth working with, they cost too much. If it's an athlete that's cheaper, they're probably not worth working with. So we're trying to connect a B2B team product with a 16-year-old, which can be challenging. And we're doing that through content and PR, which I can answer any questions if you want. So the second point is owning Yeah, sorry, question?
Just on that point, what is the reasoning behind actually having 2 separate names there in that sense? B2B and B2C.
Good question, yeah.
You kind of leverage that, or what's that kind of thinking behind that?
Yeah, so that was a big debate at the time. So do we just call the whole thing Catapult and we just sell Catapult to everyone? It's partly due to being a public company. So if the consumer product doesn't do really well, it's not as connected to the Catapult brand. We can treat it separate and sort of sandbox it a little bit. So it's, I guess, a negative way to look at it. If it fails, you can just kill it off. But that was definitely part of the logic behind it. Our CEO of the consumer also didn't think the Catapult name and brand was strong enough to sell at the consumer level. He thought the word player and the brand behind it was a little bit sexier. So their whole brand is completely different. They use a lot of pinks and navies and rich blues. So they go after a much younger, vibrant audience compared to our Catapult, which is a bit more techie corporate brand. So that was also part of the reason, which I don't know if those are good enough reasons for you, but that was just sort of the logic behind it.
Yeah. Is there, I guess, what was your thinking on that kind of on that decision in terms of having the two brands? It was similar in that respect, because I guess my immediate thinking is that if I'm a 16-year-old and I'm playing soccer, I want to be like the pro players. I've already bought their jerseys to be exactly the same and all this kind of stuff. What was, I guess, your thinking on that?
I mean, if it was up to me from a marketing perspective, it's easier if everything's just Catapult. The only thing that connects the two is our brand mark, this little C. So the logos are the same. Ours says Catapult, theirs says Player. So we're trying to leverage that mark as much as possible to connect the two. And to be honest, I think down the track, it'll end up being the same thing. And the Player brand will end up just being a product under the Catapult umbrella. But it's, a lot of it is just sandboxing at the moment. We're new to the B2C market and just sort of testing it out. But it's growing faster than we probably thought it would. So we'll probably have to readdress that question.
Does it also give you more freedom because you're sandboxed?
Yeah, it does.
More innovations in that space that are more relevant to that space, and then pick up that benefit.
Correct,
the umbrella, when you bring it in.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. The other thing is a lot of people in our sort of our core performance audience and those research sports scientists, they hate the idea of using a consumer product. They want to use the absolute best. So if they see their technology used by a 12-year-old playing five-a-side, that might put them off a little bit. So we want to keep that sort of elitist feel as well. They'll come back to you.
A teenager can't afford a sports scientist.
Yep.
He can't afford the very best stuff. So if he starts off with something smaller, like what he can afford in his range, when he wants to go pro, eventually he can go and get something better. So you can tell, you're sort of splitting the men from the boys.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
It makes sense to have them separate.
Yeah. There you go. Sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah. Have you seen a complete segmentation of kind of platform, like Snapchat would be more your PC kind of environment to the age? So when you compare the two products, have you completely separated the platforms that you're kind of going after?
Yeah, especially from a social perspective. So I run all Catapult social. So we're very Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube heavy.
B2B.
Yeah, whereas Player's very Instagram, Snapchat.
Have you ever tried crossing over?
We sort of cross-reference each other. So our Player brand just announced a big partnership with New York City Football Club, which means they're selling into a couple thousand of their academy program. So I think it was like 2,500 Player devices sold into that. We don't actually work with New York City FC, which was interesting. We've gone straight to the academy level. But that's just an example on social and through PR. We sort of cross-reference each other and we say our consumer product just announced this, and Player will sometimes announce when we sign like a Real Madrid on their platform. So
if you had to choose one platform for B2C and one for B2B?
B2B, I'd still say Twitter B2B, which is interesting because it feels like Twitter's dying with everything else. Yeah, we mostly just use Facebook for events. We could definitely be using LinkedIn better. But for our audience, I would say Twitter. And B2C, I'd say Instagram. Yeah. What was I up to? So owning performance. So everyone just sees us as this GPS device and a technology company. And at the end of the day, every company is a technology company these days. So we're trying to move away from that and own performance. And performance doesn't just mean the technology behind it. It means the people behind it as well. So we define performance as people and process. A lot of our content we're creating sort of follows that logic. So owning that word through content and PR is important. And we're starting to build out this digital content platform to sort of execute on that. Education is a big one, especially when we go into emerging markets. There's a lot of people that just don't know how to use the technology. So our two biggest reasons why we don't make a sale, besides competitors, are financial resources, it's too expensive, and human resources. They don't have anyone at the team that can use it. So it's hard to fix the first one. We've made acquisitions, so we have cheaper products, but with the second one, it's all education and upskilling people, which we're starting to do with more formal certification programs, both online and in classrooms. So we do a lot through universities where we go into like Leeds Beckett University in the UK, and we deliver a 3-day course. So everyone in their sports science department, when they graduate, they know how to use Catapult already. So when they get hired by Liverpool or Manchester United, they're already ready to go. So we're doing a lot of that, more online as well as offline. And then the data storytelling template for media opportunities. All the league-wide stuff I mentioned earlier, it's very cookie cutter. We go into a league and say, we can measure this, so you can put it on TV and make money. But there's a lot more stuff we can do around that space, and we're starting to sandbox. I've been using that word a lot for some reason. I never use that word. With the NBL a little bit. So we have a metric called player load, which is basically the total volume an athlete's done. So if you think of an Apple Watch with your little green, blue, and red rings, it's basically that, but on steroids. So it's really granular in what you can look at. So we're using that for NBL to show sort of a fuel gauge. So when a player enters the game in the fourth quarter, how much has he got left in the tank, basically. And then the commentators can start telling a story. Oh, the game's gone to overtime. He doesn't have much left. Like, you start to see his performance drop. And then you couple that with things like heart rate. When he goes to the free throw line, starts to take a shot, his heart rate's up to 160. So it just gives the commentators something else to talk about.
So just a quick question on that in terms
Yeah.
of the data. You can have it described that athletes are physical freaks with an unhealthy attitude to competition. That's what gets them to the top.
Yeah.
And they can be competitive within teams as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this technology can make them competitive and potentially selfish.
Yep.
Have you seen any instances of that where actually this sort of data can lead to unintended consequences or lack of cohesion?
Yeah. So that we get a mixed. There's kind of a broad spectrum on how our users engage with the data internally. So I've been to a lot of college football teams in the US, which is sort of our core audience over there, where at the end of a training session, they'll print up all the data and they'll just put it up on the wall in the locker room to show who was fastest. And all the players are fighting over it and like talking crap to each other and all that stuff. And then there's other users that keep it completely private. They'll never show the data to the players, and the players know they're wearing this little box, but they don't know why. But we have had examples where, like in the first example where they put it up on the wall and it's sort of ended in conflict a little bit, and players like, why are you measuring this stuff? What are you doing with the data? We get that more on the professional end, again more in the US. They're a little bit more sensitive, I think, the players. And the problem with like the NBA, NFL, NHL, you work with the teams, but then your conversations are with the league, but then they have the Players Association as well. So you have to keep them all happy, and they all want to know what happens to the data. And for some reason, I haven't got the question yet, who owns the data? I always get the question, who owns the data? So the team owns the data, we have rights to the data. So that means we can use de-identified versions of that data to build into our consumer products and to sell for monetization reasons through media, but the team owns the data. I don't know if that answered your question or not. Yeah. Okay, close enough. Come back to you.
Are you getting into sort of diminishing returns now? Like if all teams apply it, if all competitors apply it, they get their benefits. Is there a lot more to do because you're reaching the limits of human potential?
As in diminishing returns for us selling into the teams or for them using the technology?
Diminishing return for your market, your sales, even the performance that you can improve.
Or talking about our market, so we're only 18% penetrated in the wearables market, and that's our most saturated market. So there's still heaps and heaps of green field out there. And that's just the elite space, so not even amateur or consumer. So we're not worried about that part. Diminishing returns from the client's perspective, they don't really have a choice. Once you start using the data, you can't just not use it anymore, especially because all the teams you're playing against are using it. So you think of it as that sort of extra 1% to get the most out of your athletes. And sure, there's probably a time where we can't get any more out of the athletes, but that doesn't mean you can just take away the technology. That just means the technology's staying for good. Does that have a question?
I watch most of the NBL games that get broadcasted.
Yep. Have you seen the data?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, quite honestly, I find it very confusing.
Okay. We're doing a poor job of that one then.
Yeah. Are you happy with the way it gets depicted on the broadcast?
No, and I think the NBL is very confused how to represent the data as well. I think the AFL does it the best, but they keep it very, very simple, just speed and distance. the NBL is infatuated with heart rate for some reason. And heart rate's, it's difficult to capture because it's worn to, our device captures the heart rate data, but it captures it from a heart rate strap that you can just buy at Rebel Sport. And that moves a little bit during competition. So we have had examples in the NBL where it's moved a little bit. They've shown it on broadcast. It says his heart rate's like 30 in the fourth quarter. Yeah, and so obviously we get the blame for that, but it's picking up the data, but we can't do anything about the heart rate strap. So examples like that, the NBL just sort of rushes things to market without being quite ready. But it's partly on us as well, telling a better story and educating the NBL how they can do it better. But we're starting to do stuff that'll be ready for next season, because I think the season's about halfway over now, but it's stuff that we'll start to implement next season that'll be a little bit better.
Do you see a military application in military training and
yeah.
SAS troops?
So we don't talk about military at all, but we work with a lot of countries, the military, US military, English military, Australian military. There's a few other countries, but I won't say the monetary value of our deals with the Australian military. It's very, very significant. But yeah, they use it to set up like training processes and everything. But yeah, good question. There's a lot of application there, and firefighters as well. A lot of firefighters use it.
Given the position of the device, if someone falls on their back wrongly, do they get injured?
Yeah, so I said at the start, it's never led to an injury where the device is. So obviously we work in AFL, NRL, NFL, so it does get hit, but it's never been an injury.
Where the sports bra kind of things, that it's spongy and soft, so that it
yeah, definitely.
Instrument back as well.
Yeah, so there is quite a bit of padding around there. Let's go back to that random photo I had in there. Yeah, so you can kind of see there's already quite a bit of padding there that softens it. Yeah, and if at the end of the day, if it breaks, it's not going to like go into the athlete. Yeah, if it breaks, it breaks. But yeah, it's never led to an injury.
But very simple. You might think it might be a stupid question, but why design to wear here rather than you could simply make it design like Fitbit and wear it in the player's hand? It would still measure your heart rate, speed, and motion.
Yeah, I mean most sports you can't wear anything on your wrist, so it has to be. Yeah, so it has to be. So if you think of a basketball uniform, what that covers, it has to be under that. So the only two spots that it can capture every body movement is up there or down at the coccyx bone. Yeah, but that if you fell on that, it would hurt a lot more. Yeah. So the technology can be worn anywhere. So we have boxes where they're both wrists and on the ankles, and you capture different data at different body parts, and you can combine it all. But during competition, you just can't wear it on wrists and legs and everything.
Cool. What do you say we
skip along? Yeah. We'll save questions.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a session that we're going to talk about questions, but we'd love to go through some of the stuff that you prepared as well.
Sounds good. So everything we do on the B2B marketing side is sort of split into 4. So digital and lead gen, conferences and events, which is our biggest marketing spend, both industry conferences and then workshops that we run. So industry conferences are pretty obvious. We just sponsor or get a speaker or exhibition booth or whatever. Workshops are Catapult owned events, usually 50 to 100 people. We mostly run them in emerging markets as brand awareness, and then we'll fly in a marquee client to talk about how they use the technology. So a perfect example of that, we just did it last week, have an event in Tokyo. We had 85 people there. We flew the head of high performance from Leicester City to Tokyo. He spoke for an hour about how he uses Catapult, and then everyone in Tokyo buys the technology. That's sort of the general concept of it. I'll just come back to you, sorry. And then content and communications, we kind of bundled together. So everything we push out there that tells the story of what Catapult is, which includes social and PR and everything, and then product marketing, which is becoming more and more important through these acquisitions. I'll skip through these pretty quickly. So this is just how we measure the effect of marketing, basically, with revenue, total reach. We try to influence about 20% of new business through marketing qualified leads. This is an example of one of our campaign calendars. So you see the personas we go after, all the different campaigns we set up. In-season and pre-season is very important. So we know exactly when to sell to teams. That's the advantage of working in sport. You know when the season starts, you know when it ends. people don't buy technology during the season because they don't want to change anything. As soon as the season ends, they're ready to buy. So it's very cyclical, and we know exactly when to go after every sport in every country. So all of our content and campaigns are based around that cycle. So this is first half of this year in rest of world, so everything out of Americas, second half, and then everything in North America, first half and second half. I don't know if that's interesting enough to take a photo of.
Maybe, sorry, before we move on, maybe it would be awesome to talk about how do you go and organize a content calendar like this?
Yep.
Right? What are the factors that you take into consideration? When do you start,
Mm-hmm.
and how does this come to be, basically?
Yeah, good question. So we always start, anything in marketing, we start with the business objectives. So what is our revenue target? How's that split by region? How's that split by sport? So an example, I won't say our revenue target for this financial year, but we have this big X number, and that's split into, let's say, 20% of that is for APAC, and then we do sort of a total addressable market analysis of, let's say, the APAC region. What are the most important sports in that? So soccer, in Northeast Asia you've got baseball, a little bit of rugby union, China is soccer, basketball. So we sort of break it down by region, then by sport, and then we create content for those regions with the audience personas in mind and for those sports. So an example would be, what's a good one here? So this mitigating injury risk during periods of fixture congestion. We created that campaign specifically for performance coaches in English soccer. So that was a 4-part content series. So we put all the content on the website, and then we also put it as an ebook. So we put it behind a gated wall, so we capture as much information as possible from prospects. But then we push it out as soon as the Premier League finishes. So to really, actually that one we put before the pre-season because we wanted to capture leading into the new season, and since most of the teams already use the technology, it's more of an upskilling campaign. But that's sort of the general approach. Start with the business objectives, split it into region, split it into sport, and then talk specific to one audience persona, because you never want to be everything for everyone, otherwise no one gets value out of it. Good question.
What do you find, what content do you find is most effective for maybe different audience personas?
Like the actual type of content, like video? It's hard to go past video. I think video always gets the most engagement, especially when you push it out through social. I'm always surprised how many people download our ebooks. It's the same content we put on the website, we just package it differently, and you get like 1,000 people putting their emails in to download it. I mean, it's already there on the website, so I'm always surprised how effective those are. But I'm guilty of it. I always go to HubSpot and download their ebooks and give them all my details. So I'd say ebooks and video are the most effective. One thing we're starting to do more and more, so the research validation papers that I mentioned earlier that sports scientists pump out regularly, they're very, very boring. They're usually 10 to 15 pages, very dry content, but the content of that dictates a lot of the stuff that happens in our industry. So we're starting to turn those dry research papers into infographics, so just taking the real high-level applied findings from that and just putting it in a one-pager, adding a bit of colour, which people really like. Go ahead. Yeah.
Being a listed company,
yep.
you're obliged to give continuous disclosure. And I wonder, I don't know if you report forward, but how does that sort of time frame influence your campaign calendar?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, we do report quarterly. There's always a bit of a rush to sell more things at each end of each quarter. So the other thing, the other layer to what I was just saying around our content calendar is to close new business before the end of quarters. A lot of it, as I said, because sport is so cyclical, we know when it ends, we know when a new season starts. It's difficult to base it around when quarters start and finish because it has to be around when the seasons start and finish. So we ramp up our content production sort of in the 3rd month of each quarter, but we're kind of restricted by our audience and when they're actually ready to listen to us. That's just the second half of North America. North America has a very different approach to rest of world. Rest of world's very soccer, rugby, cricket. North America's the 5 major ones. So American football, baseball, basketball, ice hockey, soccer is number 5. So we create all of our content with our English market in mind, and then we sort of regionalize it for Asia or the US. So from a brand perspective, this is a bit of a challenge we have at the moment. So as in my role overseeing all B2B marketing, I'm back in control of our brand. So the CEO of Consumer that I mentioned oversaw brand through the whole rebrand process, but now he's sort of given it back to me in a bit of a mess. So the top is our sort of online visual presence, which is very orange, black, corporate-y feel, and then our offline assets. We introduced this navy, we call it Catapult Elite Navy, and we've just overused it. And you can see our online presence is very different to our offline presence. So we're going through a whole brand audit at the moment where we'll meet somewhere in the middle and you'll see a brand new website in the coming months. But this is just an example of growing too fast, buying a lot of other companies, trying to integrate it all, and then make it look all pretty, and then you end up with a very different look and feel. So yeah, you'll see that fixed pretty shortly. One of the things I mentioned at the start, how we've made all these acquisitions, how do they all fit together? So July this year, we had Exos, we had Catapult, we had Exos, which is our video business, we had AMS by Catapult, which is the athlete management, our wearable products under the Catapult umbrella. Then Player Tech actually has 2 products. It's got a consumer side and a B2B side, and then our consumer device, Player. So AMS, I'm going to test out the laser. There we go. AMS moved into Catapult, so now that's become Catapult AMS. GP Sports is now just a product under the Catapult umbrella, so that product's called Evo. Player Tech team has disappeared. So we have a lot of complexity in our product. I'm not going to go into the detail, but our Player Tech product is now considered an elite product. We sell that sort of as a spectrum model, so we call it Player Tech Plus, sell it as a certain price point. If they can't afford it, we start stripping features away. So Player Tech team still exists, but under this umbrella. And now Player has picked up this squad component that I mentioned earlier. So by April next year, Player Tech will disappear completely. We'll have a clear B2B and B2C model. Exos will continue to exist just because of their brand presence over there, and it's just that labor-intensive product. But by January 2020, Exos will fall under this video bucket alongside Vision. I've deliberately removed our name because we're about to release our new elite wearable device, which is pretty exciting, but that'll come out in March. And then, so it's just a lot clearer B2B, B2C. So we're stripping away brands. We've bought all these companies, trying to figure out how it all fits together. We've sort of figured that out now, and now we're starting to get rid of brands that aren't Catapult. Because at the end of the day, this is the only brand we want to build up. And everything else is just sort of an explicit product name as opposed to a separate brand. So I've got some marketing lessons here. I haven't read these since I wrote them, so I'm kind of going to read them as I go. So these are just things I've sort of picked up I've been with Catapult for 6 years. So from a PR perspective, so when I first started at Catapult, obviously we had 12 people. I was the only marketing person. I was the only marketing person for the first 4 years. So when we had 250 people, I was still the only one in marketing, which people don't believe when I tell them. But so when you, like a team of one, you sort of have to prioritize your time, figure out where to spend your resources. I put it all into PR at the start. So I'd get into the office 4 a.m. I'd call US reporters and I'd say, I'm calling from an Australian company. We make GPS devices. Did you know the New York Giants are wearing them in every training? And it's hard to not write a story about that because it's so different. So we got a lot of PR early on. And that was part of the reason I ended up moving to Chicago, because my boss said, you spend more time talking to people in the US, just go over there and set up an office. So I was there for 3.5 years. Now our team went from me to, we've got 120 people there now. But yeah, so that was my focus early on, because you're basically leveraging other people to tell the story for you. Otherwise, it's very hard to grow a brand from nothing. And just some tips there. So no one reads more media than people that actually work in media. So don't try and go for Forbes and ESPN and all the big publications first, because they're probably going to ignore you. Start from the bottom and that stuff will get read by the big guys. So think of it ladder, start from the bottom, start going to more medium publications, then you're going to get picked up by the big publications. And I don't know if this will work for every industry, but start with quantity. You don't want to go with quality PR, because otherwise you'll just get a couple big pieces, then they get lost. Quantity builds, and then you get quality.
Quick question.
Yep.
Are you familiar with Ryan Holiday?
Yes. Yep. I've read a
implemented with that, I guess, going up the chain?
Maybe subconsciously, yeah. Yeah, I've read a lot of his books. He's got some cheeky tactics to get PR attention. I haven't gone to some of the extremes he has, some of the stuff he did at American Apparel, but I guess it's a pretty similar concept, yeah. So the second one is sort of a generic one, but in marketing you get sold to more than you sell. So I always say don't pay full price for anything to my team, because you get approached about conferences and various platforms all the time. I always just blame it on budget. I'll say, yeah, this sounds good, but I'm going to pay this for it. And it's amazing how many times companies will just say yes. Another PR tip that I've found successful, always downplay your size. So when I talk to reporters now, I don't say we're this big global company that works with all these teams. I say we're a Melbourne-based company that works with overseas teams, and always make it sound like we're smaller than we are, because reporters want to feel like they've unearthed something. They don't want to just feel like they're talking to a Nike or whatever. They want to think like, oh, they actually found something that people don't know. But everywhere else, overstate your size. So on your website, you should sound massive. When you talk to a reporter individually, you should be like, oh, we're struggling with this little company, whatever. So your community is your most valuable asset. The biggest way we've grown our community is through physical events. So getting people in a room together, because nothing beats that. Doesn't matter how good the internet is. Getting someone in one room, perfect example is this event, and do something that forces them to tell other people about it. So the one thing that always still pops up with our US market, our very first workshop we ran over there, we did it in Hawaii, and we flew all of our American football users to Hawaii and their wives. So that was pretty much my whole marketing budget. But we gave everyone surfing lessons. Everyone was there for 3 nights. We got them drunk every night. And from that, our American football market just exploded, because everyone went back and they told everyone, Catapult flew us to Hawaii. It was this amazing event. Not only did we fly all them, we flew 2 users from English Premier League teams and 2 from AFL teams. So they'd been using Catapult for a long time. They went in and just blew the minds of everyone in the NFL, because they'd never seen technology like this. So it's one example, but we still try to do that. When we do our football workshop, we always have an activity like mountain biking, or we did a cooking lesson in New Orleans. So just something that forces them to tell other people about it when they leave. Number 5, first marketing hire. I did this not knowing really who the audience was, but your first marketing hire should always be a generalist, just a real go-getter with a bit of a communications background. This is debatable, but the second marketing hire I think should be a designer. You can't overstate how important design is and how things look, because everyone's visual, it doesn't matter who it is. We work in elite sport with sports scientists, and you would think they don't care what things look like. Everyone cares what things look like. Things like an investor deck, the more official that feels, the bigger your company is going to appear.
Is your science team under your control?
The science team?
Science. Is that under marketing?
Like sports science?
Science.
Sales. Oh, sales team. Oh, sorry. So we all report through to the same. So I report through to the CEO of the B2B side of the business, who's based in Leeds in the UK. And then he has 2 commercial directors, one for ROW, one for Americas. They report through to him as well. So we sort of sit side by side, and there's a lot of collaboration, but they don't report through to me. Sort of related to that, so our B2B marketing team, we tried it for a while, splitting it up regionally, so APAC, EMEA, and Americas. We've since scrapped that because it got really confusing, so now it's all functional led under those pillars I just went through. The problem with regionally led is people end up doing things in silos, because they all create their own content, they go after their own PR, all their product marketing is regional, so everyone doubles up on work, and you have to over-communicate. And I mean, I'm already on calls every morning and every night, but you had to do that even more when it was regionally based. When it's functional, you've just got one person that owns each thing, and then they just report through to one person. So if that's one tip you take away if you're growing a marketing team, I think that's an important one. Just some tools. I think every marketing team needs marketing automation. So we use Pardot, which is a Salesforce product. Digital asset management. We used to use Binder, B-Y-N-D-R, which is very valuable, but probably too expensive. So now we just use Google Drive. Project management tools. We use Trello and we use Slack religiously at Catapult. So everything's through Slack. From a content perspective, always provide value to your audience. No one really cares what you do. They want to get something out of whatever they're reading or watching. So I think companies always fall into the trap of just talking about themselves because it makes them feel good and they think everyone cares about them, but no one really cares about you. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You need to provide value to that person and figure out what they care about. And I think we're a little bit lucky in sport because, especially going back to our US audience, the strength coaches over there all have big egos, and we can use those egos from a content perspective because they want to have their voice heard and build their own brands. So understanding what makes people tick, I think, is one of the most important things in marketing, because if you don't know that, you're just basically talking to a wall. Brand narrative is very important for everyone. So you need to understand why you exist, otherwise no one's going to believe in what you're doing. So if you can't clearly articulate what you're trying to achieve, you're always going to struggle. And I think Catapult's always had that from the start in how we came about, and being able to tell that story is really important. And the 10th one is one that I've kind of shared from the start, and I've been lucky that our CEO really buys into it. So our CEO came from Seek. His wife is the Chief People Officer for Xero, so two big Australian companies. And they're really big on staff engagement, communicating to the staff first, making everyone feel happy and just excited to be at Catapult, because then that resonates when they speak to clients. So the happier your staff, the happier your clients, which obviously, if your clients are happy, your shareholders are happy. So always do it in that order. Don't jump straight to clients. That's all I've got. Questions? 15 minutes?
Maybe I'll kick it off with a couple of questions from my side. So you said events are working really well for you. Mm-hmm. How do you promote your events? Because you're going to some of the markets that you're. What has worked in terms of getting awareness out that, hey, there is this event, and join?
It's a good question. So one advantage of working in elite sport and knowing that the 10,000 teams is we know everyone in our market, basically. So we've got people in 24 countries. So if we hold an event in Japan, we have 4 people in Japan that know everyone that they're selling to, basically. So when we hold an event, they've already got the database in place. We do an email campaign inviting them, promote it on Facebook and through social channels as well. But they're already kind of in conversation with everyone, which might make it sound like our market's smaller than it is, but it's just that the elite end is quite finite. You know who the performance coach is at every team in the J League or the Japanese Basketball League, I forgot the name of that. But so they've got a very specific database that they're going after. And one advantage of having our events quite small is that we don't want like 200, 300 people at these events. We want to keep it small and intimate so people engage with each other. So one thing we do at every event is roundtable sessions. So we have presentations like this, that are like an hour with Q&A and everything, but the majority of the sessions will be roundtable. So we put a topic on each table, we have a moderator on each table, usually between 5 and 10 tables, and everyone has to talk. So you throw out a question and there's sort of engagement, and then we have someone capturing the notes from each one, and then we use that we leverage that content through our website and social and everything. So it's one way we kind of connect physical and digital. So promoting it through digital channels, but then capturing the content from the event through our digital channels.
So one thing we didn't discuss or hear about is competition.
Oh, yes. I won't go back to the slide, but so that performance stack is split into 3. So I was saying this before the presentation. So we have strong competition in each of those buckets, but there isn't a company that is doing those 3 buckets. So do you want me to name competitors?
Go.
Okay, yeah.
Talk about the market.
Yeah. So wearable technology space, our biggest competitors are Stat Sports, who are based in Dundalk, Ireland. So they're relatively big, about 100 people. So bit of background story on Stat Sports. So GP Sports, the Canberra-based company that beat us to market that we eventually acquired. So they were the first GPS technology company in the world. based in Canberra with like half a dozen people. They started selling into the UK through a distributor. That distributor, I don't want to tell stories that I'm not supposed to since we're public, but that distributor basically took the technology and then resold it under a different brand, and that became StatSports. So GB Sports, the company we eventually acquired, basically birthed StatSports, who became our biggest competitor. So they work with a lot of teams in the UK because they're very dominant there. They don't have any teams in Australia, I don't believe. They don't have any staff in Asia, so they might have a couple teams in China. They're starting to grow a little bit in the US. They've set up an office recently, but they're very, very UK-centric. On the video side, there's a company called Sports Tech and Huddle, so that's actually one company. Huddle, HUDL, is the biggest video company in sport globally. They've taken the opposite approach to us, where we've always started from the top and now we're starting to filter down into the other markets. Huddle started from the bottom, working with US high schools. So they're based in Lincoln, Nebraska, of all places. There's nothing else to do there. So they sell into high schools with their video technology, and now they're moving up into colleges. And then they bought an Australian company called Sports Tech that they sell into NBA, not NFL, but yeah, NBA and a little bit soccer in the UK. So they're our biggest video competitor. And then on the athlete management side, it's just sort of a free-for-all. There's like 30 companies that are sort of at the same space, yeah. And then a lot of big companies are starting to enter that space. So Microsoft have an athlete management system. Tableau have something similar. But our biggest competitor in that space is companies just hiring a couple coders and building something specific for them. So yeah, no company doing all three, or even two, but we have strong competitors in each of the buckets.
What's something you've changed your mind about in the last 2 years?
Me personally, or the business?
You personally, in terms of marketing and
Can I think about it and come back to you? Yeah. Up the back there?
Betting in the NBA has been legalized recently in North America. Is there a market for your data in that space?
Yes and no. It's more, yeah, the NBA is a tough one because of how I was explaining before. So we don't have a league-wide deal with the NBA because the Players Association is sort of its own beast. So you might have heard about the NBA lockouts in the past. They happen because the league officials and the Players Association officials don't agree on something. And so they basically cancel the league for a little while. It's happened a few times in history. So if they don't come to full agreement, nothing gets done. So the NBA has told us they want Catapult being used in games. But the Players Association says, what's happening with the data? Why do they have to wear it? All these other questions, which is why it keeps dragging out. So it's something like betting. I'm not confident that'll ever happen with the NBA, but it'll definitely happen with other leagues pretty soon. The NRL is starting to dabble in it a little bit, using our data for betting purposes, but yeah, leagues in the US are, I think, a long way off that.
The UK is very kind of saturated in the sense that all the teams are really close to each other, whereas the US is a lot faster. So on that, which market do you think is harder to kind of attack if the word of mouth in the UK is a lot stronger than the US just because of location?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so geographically the US is more spread out, but our actual user base is probably easier to penetrate. I think the US, once you start working with one team, it's easier to get it to spread because no one wants to feel like they're missing out. Whereas people in the UK, I'm trying to guess where your accent's from, but people are a little bit more stubborn, I think, in the UK. And most of the users in Premier League and Championship, League One, League Two are from either the UK or at least Europe. And our biggest competitive pressure in Europe is really small companies popping up that just work in those countries. So there's a company called K-Sport, which is a version of our wearable based in Italy, and a lot of Italian teams use them because they only want to use an Italian supplier, which we don't see outside of Europe. Whereas the US, everyone is either American or Australian. There's been a big influx of people going from the AFL to the NBA or NFL. So the advantage of that for us is they've already been using Catapult in the past, so it's easier to get them to adopt it. So yeah, in general, UK, even though it's closer, they're more stubborn and more rigorous from a technical perspective in selling to them, whereas the US, you can go in with big claims and say, this team's using it, and they'll usually adopt it a bit quicker.
there scope for applying the technology in industrial situations like analysing bricklaying or carpet laying or?
There definitely is. So my answer to that is just we don't have time to do every industry, and we're sort of just focusing 100% on sport, but you could absolutely get data that would be valuable in a lot of industry. Anything that's movement related, you could get value.
Analytics cost the same for every sport, roughly? Or is it?
Yeah. So it's a subscription model, so you pay per athlete, but the technology is essentially the same. You saw all the different products we have up there. So these are, well, let's talk about where we are today. So those 5 are all of our wearable devices. So they're all priced differently, and they all do slightly different things. But we sell them at the same price. Doesn't matter what the sport is. They just pay per athlete.
Some players it's really important, this sort of stuff. Some players it's less important.
Yep.
Is it the same analytics for everyone, or is it position based as well?
It's both. So everyone will get the same performance stuff. So an example in American football, so the linemen don't move much. So if you just look at GPS data for a lineman, like they'll cover 10 meters the whole game, like they barely move. But because they're clanging each other so hard, going back to the sport-specific stuff, we can pick up the accelerometry data and measure the impact and the G-force every time they hit. So the data you'll look at is different for a lineman compared to a wide receiver or a running back. But yeah, it's still priced the same. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it does still cost the same for those athletes, though. Yeah. You'll see slightly different data, but we price it the same.
On one of the slides, you had something about wanting the customers to be tied to strong staff, not to like the technology.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So, what's your definition of strong staff? Is it that they're technically knowledgeable or know how to socialize? So what's the definition?
No, that's another good question. So I should have a slide in here. So we have this model where we want to advance our clients up the path, and we see it as sort of in 3 stages. So the onboarding stage, the upskilling stage, and then the advanced stage. Because it's GPS technology at the end of the day on the wearable side, so there's always the danger of it being commoditized. And if our clients stay at that sort of bottom onboarding stage, it's easier for them to go to another supplier because they're only looking at it at a base level. So the more you move up, the stickier the data becomes, the more engaged they become with the data, and the more they start to look deeper into the data. So with any client, we want to move them up that sort of ladder. Otherwise, they just think of it as a piece of technology or a commodity, and they can move to a cheaper product.
So how does strong staff achieve that? So
strong staff like internally or at the team?
Well, according to the definition you had up there, what makes the staff? The staff are helping them on that journey, like guides or?
Yeah, sorry, I'm thinking of a different slide. Yeah, so the better our staff understand the application of the data, the easier they can move our clients up that rung. Yeah. So there's the technical element, but then there's the actual application of it. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So how did you land Mark Cuban?
Yeah, I didn't really cover that, did I? Okay. Good question. So there's not much of a story there, really. So the Dallas Mavericks were using Catapult, so they were a client. So at training one day, he saw it in use, thought it was pretty cool. Our executive chairman, his name's Adir Schiffman. Does anyone know Adir in the room? Okay, yeah, I've never been anywhere that someone doesn't know Adir. So he reached out to Adir. Adir reached out to him to sort of just talk about Catapult. At the same time, this was right before I moved to the US, I was helping South by Southwest, the event in Austin, set up their first sort of sports stream within that. It was called SX Sports. And as part of that, we wanted to land a big name. And I reached out with Adir to get Mark Cuban involved. And that sort of led Mark Cuban to investigate Catapult a little bit more, and he started talking to the Dallas Mavericks user about what the technology is, how it's utilized. A guy named Jeremy Holsopple, he's now moved on to the Premier League. But basically, purely through engagement with our technology through the team that he owned, he became more and more interested in it. We just happened to have a really charismatic executive chairman that pulled him in at the right time, and he bought in pretty quickly.
was it long before, sorry, what was the quantum of the investment and how long before the IPO or the listing?
It's probably 9 months before, so yeah, definitely helped. Yeah, yeah. So he's a strategic investor. He's obviously a big name, and he's from our industry. He's not the biggest financial investor we have by any means, but he's a super approachable guy. Like, I've been on a lot of email chains with him. He writes back to every email, even if it's just one sentence. It's pretty impressive for someone of his stature. But he's built a relationship with our executive chairman, but it just shows how important the people side of business is, because it just became a human connection with him, and he bought into our story early on.
What's your executive chairman's name again?
Adir Schiffman. Yeah, so he was heavily involved in our growth. He joined about the same time I did. It still works.
Maybe one last question.
Last question?
Are you worried about him being a conflict of interest, the NBA and maybe the Players Association?
Not with the NBA, because he's pretty influential, even at that level. And he probably won't have much influence on the Players Association either way.
I mean, in a potential lockout situation, if you're trying to maybe approach in the same media.
Yeah, I mean, having him on our side is better than not having him on our side. He's a very outspoken guy. Things like he's trying to get, so guys that play for the US in the Olympics don't get paid, and there's usually a big name player that gets injured every Olympics. So he's campaigning pretty hard for players to get paid to play in the Olympics, which obviously goes against the original amateur approach to the Olympics. But something like that, he's just communicating from the ground up, and it looks like it's going to happen because it's protecting the athletes. So this is a pretty similar narrative in that he understands the value of Catapult for protecting athletes on the court, and he's a big, vocal, rich advocate that we have on our side when those conversations pop up.
Great.
I need to keep thinking about your questions. That's
Fantastic.
it.
All right. Thank you very much. Awesome. Well, Boden, again, thank you so much for the talk. This was awesome, and listening to the story of Catapult. And thank you for definitely joining us. So the next event that we have is going to be in February, beginning of February, and that's going to be all about LinkedIn. So that's a very interesting platform that is getting a lot more popularity over the past maybe 12 to 6 months, and specifically around advertising. So I know there's been a lot of talk around LinkedIn management, and so just like you have Facebook management and Facebook ads, LinkedIn management, LinkedIn ads, but LinkedIn ads is probably a newer player in the space of marketing. So that's going to be the next event. So definitely join us for that event. We also record these events. So if you found it interesting, if there were things that you want to definitely refer back to, join our Slack group and join us on LinkedIn as well. So if you on LinkedIn you type Growth Colony, you would be able to find us. If you do follow us, then all the videos, we will be putting up snippets of these videos up, and you will be then linked to the full video, and you can get all that information from there. On that note, again, looking forward to catching up with you after here and maybe over a drink. But again, thanks again for coming.